She showed up with a subpoena, ready to witness justice, but the guard looked her in the eye and said, "You're not allowed in." No reason, no apology, just power flexed in plain sight. 4 minutes later, the system that locked her out was begging her to come back. But let's start from the beginning. The sun over Dallas wasn't just hot, it was hostile. It poured down like judgment, reflecting off the courthouse's marble steps with blinding force. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, beads of sweat already beginning to form beneath the fabric. But it wasn't the heat that made her jaw tighten. It was the stares, the whispers, and the man at the metal detector who had just said something she wasn't sure she'd heard right. "Excuse me?" she asked, not blinking. The officer, a thick-necked man with mirrored sunglasses and an attitude far heavier than his badge, didn't bother repeating himself. He only pointed at the laminated sign taped near the entrance. "Closed session. Authorized personnel only." "I'm State Representative Jasmine Crockett," she said, holding up her badge. "I'm here in official capacity. I was notified about the proceedings this morning. I have a right to observe." The guard didn't flinch. "That's not what Judge Wilmer says." Something in his voice. It wasn't just authority. It was satisfaction, as if he'd been waiting for this moment, waiting to turn someone like her away. A black woman in power, unapologetic, assertive. He didn't need a reason. He had a uniform. Jasmine kept her voice even. "This is a public courthouse. The docket for Courtroom 7A wasn't sealed. There's no reason I should be—" "I'm not here to argue policy, ma'am," he interrupted, dragging out that last word. "Just doing my job." "Ma'am," again, not the respectful kind, the kind that says, "Know your place." Behind her, footsteps slowed. A man walking past paused, nudging the woman beside him. "Is that Jasmine Crockett?" She heard it, and she knew what came next. The phones, the sneaky snapshots, the sideways glances from across the plaza. She stepped aside from the doorway, lips pressed tight, letting others pass. She was blocking traffic. People with suits and briefcases were brushing by her now, entering the building with no issue. Only her. Only Jasmine Crockett was being denied. Her pulse ticked faster, but her voice remained calm. "You're violating open access policy under state law. You do know that, right?" The officer only looked back at her blankly. "Take it up with the judge." She took a breath, counted to 4, thought about turning around, walking back to her car, calling the courthouse from a safe, air-conditioned place with cell signal and plausible deniability. But then she remembered Isaiah James. 17 years old, a straight-A student, arrested during a traffic stop in South Oak Cliff. The bruises on his face. The way his mother had cried in her office 2 weeks ago, clutching a crumpled flyer that said, "Resisting arrest, State versus James." She thought about the patterns, the names, the endless rotation of young black boys being chewed up by a system that didn't just fail them. It fed on them. And now the one person sent to observe, who wanted to observe, was being locked out. Not accidentally, not by mistake, intentionally. She moved down the steps to the lower plaza and stood beneath the shade of a concrete column. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady despite the heat. She called her chief of staff. "Marcus, I'm at the courthouse. They won't let me in." His reaction was instant. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" She gave him the rundown. Who, what, where, how. He didn't even wait for her to finish. "I'll get you something official from the speaker's office," he said. "In the meantime, we need eyes on this. Did anyone record it?" "Probably," Jasmine said, glancing around. Already she saw 2 people typing rapidly, phones out, one of them panning toward her face. "This is going to blow up," Marcus said. "Just hold tight. Jasmine hung up. She didn't need to wait. Let them record. Let them share. The fight wasn't behind the locked courtroom doors anymore. It was out here, in the open. And she wasn't just going to knock. She was going to dismantle the damn gate. Her phone buzzed again. A text from a friend at the local station. "You trending? Someone tagged you in a clip. You outside the court?" Followed by a second message. #let her in is climbing on Twitter. She smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was focus. Fire. She opened the courthouse docket on her tablet and scrolled down to 7A. No seal, no closed order, no protective filing. Just one name. State of Texas versus Isaiah James. Misdemeanor resisting arrest. Assigned to Judge Gregory Wilmer. Of course. Wilmer. The same judge who once sentenced a 15-year-old to 30 days for skipping school. The one who railed against urban disorder during an interview last year. The one who'd dismissed a police brutality complaint because no lasting injuries were documented. She stared at the name. This wasn't random. They knew she was coming. They didn't want witnesses. The injustice wasn't a glitch. It was the program, and the only way to beat a program like that was to force it into daylight. She lifted her phone again and tapped record. "This is Representative Jasmine Crockett," she said into the camera. "I was denied entry to a public courtroom this morning without explanation. I came to observe proceedings on behalf of my constituents, because justice, especially when it's flawed, demands transparency." She paused. "The people deserve to know what's happening in their name. And if the doors are locked to us, we'll bring the courthouse out here." She ended the recording, posted it with the hashtag, and the spark caught fire. By the time she looked up, the sun hadn't dimmed, but something in the air had shifted. People were stopping, listening, gathering. She wasn't alone on the steps anymore. In the courthouse, it was just starting to sweat. 4 minutes later, Jasmine was still standing on the courthouse steps, back to the sun, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her. She thought about the mother whose son had been slammed to the pavement by a sheriff's deputy last month, how that mother had called her office in tears, praying someone, anyone, would listen. She thought about the young black men across Texas who were funneled through this courthouse like cattle through a chute. And now she, the one woman in a position to witness, to speak, to amplify, was being shut out. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus, her chief of staff. "They're trending you already," he said breathlessly. "Someone uploaded the video. You standing outside. #let her in." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. The system had drawn first blood. "Good," she said. "Let them watch." She moved fast. By the time she reached the Capitol-connected database in her car, she'd pulled the full judiciary schedule. The courtroom was not listed as sealed. There had been no order of exclusion. The judge, Gregory Wilmer, was a known hardliner, especially in cases involving black defendants. And the defendant in today's case? A 17-year-old high school senior named Isaiah James, arrested for resisting arrest during a routine traffic stop. No body cam footage released. No lawyer allowed to show his injuries. Jasmine tapped her phone. "Get me the press, and get me the speaker." If they wanted to lock her out of the courtroom, fine. She would drag the courtroom to the public square. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless in her car, hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the courthouse in the rearview mirror. But her mind was moving like a freight train at full speed. The engine of righteous anger was fully ignited, and it was no longer about her badge being dismissed or a courtroom door being shut. It was about power. Who had it? Who misused it? And who had the audacity to challenge it? The moment she'd stepped away from the courthouse doors, something inside her had clicked. Not snapped, not broken, but aligned. This wasn't the first time someone tried to shrink her. She knew the feeling too well. The polite condescension, the veiled resistance, the institutional smirks behind polite policies. But this one. This wasn't subtle. This was blatant. She opened her phone. Notifications were coming in by the second. Texts, DMs, mentions. Her inbox was already flooded. Reporters wanted statements. Activists were tagging her. Constituents were asking, "Are you okay?" But more importantly, they were saying, "We see you." And then, her screen lit up. A call from Marcus. "You're at 100,000 views in under 10 minutes, he said without greeting. "The video's been picked up by local networks and it's already reached national feeds. Twitter's going wild." Jasmine's voice was calm. "Good. Then they'll have no choice but to respond." Judge Wilmer's office just released a one-line statement. "There may have been a misunderstanding." "That's it." She laughed bitterly. "A misunderstanding? A state representative denied entry to an open courtroom is a misunderstanding? Yeah, they're trying to soften it before it blows up any worse. Too late, though. The story's alive now." She hung up again, mid-sentence. She didn't need strategizing. She needed movement. She opened her laptop, tethering it to her phone, and pulled up the legislative court access policy she herself had co-sponsored 2 years ago. It clearly stated, "All elected officials shall retain the right to observe any public proceeding unless a court order expressly limits such access." She copied the statute, pasted it into a tweet with a screenshot of the sign on the courthouse doors. No such order exists, and yet, here we are. Hashtag let her in. Then a second tweet. If transparency is inconvenient, perhaps the problem isn't the witnesses. The notifications exploded instantly. She glanced up again at the courthouse steps. People were gathering. It wasn't a protest. Not yet. But the energy was shifting. Jasmine recognized the tempo. She had seen it before. In courtrooms, in marches, in the eyes of mothers who buried sons without justice. Something electric was in the air. She leaned back in her seat and let her thoughts stretch further. This was never going to be just about her. That had never been her mission. She remembered every time she'd sat across from grieving families, every time someone whispered, "I don't know where else to turn." She remembered the mother who had come to her office 2 weeks ago, Mrs. James. She had arrived with a folder full of photographs, medical records, and police paperwork. Her son, Isaiah, had been pulled over for a failure to signal. Less than 10 minutes later, he was in the hospital with a fractured wrist and a swollen cheekbone. The charge? Resisting arrest. No dashcam footage, no body cam. The arresting officer claimed Isaiah had reached for something. No weapon was found. There had been no formal explanation, just bruises and silence. And now, Isaiah was facing court, with a public defender he hadn't even met until the day before. His mother had begged Jasmine, "Please, just be there. Just watch. That's all I need. Someone in the room who sees." Jasmine had promised. And now, because of a uniform and a smirk, she'd been pushed out of the room that boy most needed her in. Her heart tightened, not with sadness, but with resolve. She grabbed her phone and dialed again. This time, the Texas House Judiciary chair. No assistant, no voicemail. Jasmine had contacts, and she knew exactly how to leap over the hierarchy when it mattered. "Derek, it's Jasmine." "Jazz? I saw the clip. What the hell's going on down there?" "I was denied access to a public courtroom. By name. I've reviewed the docket. No seal, no closure, no lawful reason. That's obstruction. That's unconstitutional." "Jesus. Do you want me to issue a statement?" "I don't want a statement. I want pressure. I want calls to Wilmer's office. I want internal counsel alerting the chief judge. I want the House Ethics Committee breathing down their necks." A pause, then, "You got it. Give me 15 minutes. She hung up again. This wasn't going to be buried. This was going to be blown open. At 1:14 p.m., Jasmine stepped out of her car and walked back toward the steps, not as a representative waiting for permission, but as a storm walking into a city. This time, cameras were waiting. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. Another reporter shouted, "Will you return if invited?" She looked straight into the camera. "I don't need an invitation to my house. This courthouse belongs to the people. I'm here. I'm staying. And if they won't let me through that door, they better be ready for what comes out this one." And just like that, the crowd erupted in applause. The moment wasn't a protest. It was a declaration. She saw Marcus jogging up with a folder of printed statements and a state seal letter from the Speaker's office, just in case anyone still needed authorization. Jasmine waved it off. "We're past that now." By evening, a makeshift podium was set up at the bottom of the steps. Volunteers had printed shirts with "Let Her In" across the chest. Isaiah's mother was there too, trembling but smiling, holding Jasmine's hand in both of hers. "They're watching now," she whispered. "They're finally watching." Jasmine didn't answer. She only looked back at the towering courthouse doors, still shut, still guarded, and felt the air vibrating with pressure. It wouldn't be long now. 3 days had passed since Jasmine Crockett had been turned away from the courtroom like an intruder. 3 days since the video of that humiliating moment had gone viral. But 3 days in the digital era was a lifetime, and in that lifetime the system had gone from silent to desperate. By now, the hashtag #LetHerIn had surged into national conversation. Local news anchors replayed the moment again and again. A black woman, a state legislator, calmly being told she wasn't authorized to enter a courtroom. It had become a symbol, not just of exclusion, but of who the system allowed to see. And while the courts tried to patch the cracks with weak PR and tight smiles, the dam had already broken. Behind the scenes, a whirlwind of legal inquiries had begun. One anonymous clerk leaked internal emails showing that Judge Wilmer's courtroom was never officially closed. The miscommunication that his office had cited turned out to be nothing more than a hasty cover, fabricated after Jasmine's presence had caught fire online. Within hours, legal watchdogs had flagged it as a potential ethics violation. But the real blow came when someone leaked the footage, the body cam video. It had existed all along, from the night Isaiah James was arrested, and it was horrifying. No aggression from Isaiah, no sudden movement, no threat. Just a calm teenager being yanked from his car, slammed against the hood, and cuffed so tightly his wrists bled. His voice trembled as he kept repeating, "I'm not resisting. I'm not resisting." And then came the gut punch. In the video, as Isaiah cried out in pain, one of the officers muttered, "Shouldn't be driving like that if he doesn't want attention. These kids think they own the damn streets." When Jasmine watched it that night, her hands went numb. It wasn't just a bad arrest. It was a calculated degradation. It was racial profiling, unchecked power, and the confident cruelty of a man who never thought anyone would watch the footage. But now everyone had. CNN aired it, then MSNBC, then ABC. By morning, the Dallas County District Attorney's Office had no choice but to act. At 10:47 a.m., a statement was released. All charges against Isaiah James have been dropped in full. An internal investigation has been opened into the arresting officer's conduct. No apology, no accountability, just a corporate backpedal disguised as reform. But Jasmine knew better than to celebrate. A dropped charge didn't undo the trauma. A press release didn't erase the bruises. Isaiah's life had been altered. And justice wasn't about damage control. It was about consequences. Still, the dismissal gave her leverage, and leverage was power. That same afternoon, Jasmine was summoned to the Capitol, not by the House Speaker, not by the Attorney General, but by the Governor's chief counsel. They met in a sleek glass room overlooking the Austin skyline. The air was cool, the tone neutral. But Jasmine could read beneath the surface. They were scared, not of her, but of the movement, of the fire she had lit, and how quickly it had gotten out of control. "We're reviewing current courtroom access policy," the counsel said, not meeting her eyes. "The governor would like your input on improving transparency, possibly forming a bipartisan commission to oversee judicial conduct." Jasmine leaned forward, hands folded. "Let's stop pretending this is about policy," she said. "This is about a culture that sees oversight as a threat, a courthouse that would rather block out a lawmaker than face the consequences of its own rot." He shifted uncomfortably. "That's not an unfair assessment." "You want my help?" she said, eyes sharp. "Then you don't need another commission. You need to open the books, review every sealed courtroom in the last 3 years, audit arrest-related dismissals, create a real-time observer program, not just for me, but for any legislator or civil rights lawyer who wants to walk in and watch." "That's a large ask," he said, blinking. "No," she said. "That's the bare minimum." There was a long pause. Then he nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. "We'll start drafting recommendations today." "You'll draft a bill," she corrected, "and I'll introduce it." When she walked out of that office, her phone buzzed again. A call from Marcus. "You're not going to believe this," he said, breathless. "Wilmer just filed for early retirement." Jasmine froze on the Capitol steps. "What?" "He submitted a letter to the Chief Justice, citing personal reasons and a desire to protect the integrity of the court." She closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't justice. It was a white flag. Wilmer was retreating before the avalanche buried him. And yet, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure, like a wound had been lanced, but the infection was still inside. She walked toward her car in silence. The next day, a press conference was held on the very steps she'd once been denied. Hundreds gathered. Isaiah stood beside her, his mother gripping his hand so tightly it looked like her fingers might break. TV crews fanned out. One by one, Jasmine laid out the timeline. The denial, the lies, the footage, the cover-up, the collapse. "We were told to leave," she said, "but the people stayed. We were told it was a misunderstanding, but the footage said otherwise, and now we're told it's over." She paused. "It's not over." She turned to Isaiah, her voice trembling. "This young man was brutalized, humiliated, and nearly convicted for the crime of surviving a police encounter. That cannot be the end of the story." The crowd roared. Signs waved in the air. "Justice is not optional. The courts work for us." Had let her in wasn't just about a door. It was about truth. And as the crowd began to chant Isaiah's name, Jasmine turned back to the courthouse. The doors were open now. No guards, no signs, just glass swinging gently in the breeze. But Jasmine didn't walk in. She didn't need to. She'd already taken the court to the streets. And now, for the first time in a long time, the people were watching. 2 weeks later, the governor stood beside her as she introduced the Court Access and Observer Oversight Act. Journalists buzzed, activists cheered. The bill promised mandatory access to all public courtroom proceedings for elected officials and accredited public advocates. It outlined penalties for obstruction. It guaranteed accountability. The system, for once, was listening, not because it wanted to, but because it had been forced to. That night, Jasmine sat alone in her office, lights dimmed, feet kicked up on the window ledge. Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, her phone lit up with a single message. "You made them beg, Jazz. You made them beg." She didn't smile. She just stared into the darkening skyline and whispered to herself, "No, I made them bleed first."